So I did say there would be interesting things potentially happening in the wake of the local elections, but to all of those who might have been asleep, who aren't sort of been paying attention, what have you been doing? um, the Tories have had an absolute kicking at this general election. Their hope, their main, or at least their main hope, was, well, we're going to lose all these councillors. That's all baked in. Bear in mind, I can't speak for any of my other local areas or constituencies around me, but I have heard on the ground a lot of the Conservative campaigners who now feel that they were abandoned by like Tory Party HQ, by Rishi Sunak. They're now off to go join Reform. So we talked yesterday about, just today, in fact, about Henry Hill's insistent that, all these, reform candidates that are going to, field all these people, they're going to have no one be going out doing all the doorstep stuff. I think we'll be fine on that front. It's just going to be, a large foghorn. It's really not going to have too much of an effect on us. Well, not from what I've been hearing, especially in my local area. From what I've heard, all those really disgruntled councillors that have lost their seats, activists, two things are happening. Either A, they've said, screw it, we're taking our bat and ball and going home, or some, in particular, are going off and saying, well, actually, we're going to go join Reform. That seems to be the two things that seem to be playing out, at least at my local level. I can't speak for any others, but I would not be surprised, as I said last video, if this is happening in other areas as well. So, hey, we'll find out soon what happens there. But more interestingly, on this front, is you are now seeing the seismic shockwaves ripple out from these local elections. You've got Rishi Sunak doing the delusional, well, I think this is going to result in a hung parliament. Meanwhile, what was it? I think it was John Curtis. I can't remember which election expert came out and sort of rubbished it and said, sorry, but all these results that you're seeing at a thing do point to the Tories absolutely losing. There is very, very, very little likelihood of a hung parliament happening at this stage. Otherwise, Labour wouldn't have won so many councillors. They wouldn't have won or done so well in the seats, etc., etc. But interestingly enough, what is going to happen tomorrow, from what we've heard, is now the Lib Dems are going to table a motion of no confidence in the government. So ultimately, there's two ways to think about this. A, this is entirely performative, even if every single other party joins in with them. So, all the Lib Dems, Labour, SNP, etc., all join in and vote for this. The Tories have an overwhelming majority. Unless a significant number of Tories actually join in this vote ain't going to happen. Now, it does seem, and we'll get on to what Ed Davey's said about this in a moment, but it does seem that Ed Davey seems to be thinking that there is enough demoralization within the Tory party that they can now somehow affect a vote of no confidence. Because even if this vote does go ahead, and let's say it turns out, I don't know, so many Tories did vote for this no confidence in their government, that would once again have an effect on Rishi Sunak's leadership and would once again open the big book of Tory fighting rules to see, well, what do we do now? We already talked about yesterday how now many Tory ministers are now on manoeuvres preparing for the post-Sunak life, from Penny Mordaunt, Tom Tugendhat, Kimi Badnoch, all these people on manoeuvres trying to sort of position themselves as the next de facto leader in waiting. Meanwhile, of course, no one wants to be leader now because, well, if they become leader now, they all know they've lost. So, honestly, a leadership election, I now think, is non-existent chance of happening unless something drastic happens. Unless something very drastic happens, I now think there's no chance of a leadership election happening now at all whatsoever. But if the Lib Dems do bring this table of conference, I mean, it is tabled, so they are going to bring it forward. But it all remains on how many Tories they can convince to join with them. Because remember, Tories are the majority, they've got control. Ultimately, it is going to depend how many Tories they can convince to join them in on this. And I just want to go over what Ed Davey actually said sort of about this. So he was on, I believe it was Politics Joe, and he was talking about the local election results. So where is it? So here it is. So he started off with saying that this is easily the worst government he's ever seen in his lifetime, and that these local elections show that the country has now had enough of Rishi Sunak and his out-of-touch Conservative government. The Conservatives were now pushed into third place for the very first time in a generation, as Liberal Democrats now swept the board of former true blue heartlands. Yet, Rishi Sunak continues to cling desperately to power, holed up in Downing Street until the bitter end. Conservative MPs need to wake up and smell the coffee, giving the country back to the election it so desperately wants and needs. The longer this appalling government now stumbles on, the worse it will be for the NHS, people's living standards, and our environment. So again, he's not wrong. He's not wrong. It's whether how many Conservative MPs agree with him. And honestly, this does look, I think what Ed Davey should have done here is make parallels with what happened in the final days of Sunak's reign, of not Sunak's reign, of Boris's reign, where obviously you've got Savage Javid and Rishi Sunak sort of resigning from office, from their cabinet, and then of course that sort of triggered the point where Johnson tried to stay on for as long as he could, and you've got all those ministers saying, "No, sorry, Johnson, time's up. We've got to go." Who knows if we could end up something like that with Rishi Sunak? Maybe you do get a series of resignations saying, "Sorry, but time to go." Maybe the jig's up, time to call a general election, because the whole point of this is to try and call a June general election, to have one sooner rather than later. But again, it all depends what the Conservative mood is, and let's face it, the Conservative mood is, as just as he said, to cling on to power as long as possible. They've really got to be, I think, in the mood to say, well, we've got to be up and out on this. So the actual motion that he put forward said that this House has no confidence in His Majesty's government. By convention, if the Prime Minister loses his vote, he will have to ask the King to dissolve the Parliament and trigger a general election. So obviously that's their goal. Bit performative, I will say this now. It's very performative. But this will put more pressure on Rishi Sunak to call a general election. And as I've talked about it before, snowball rolling down a hill. Doesn't take long before that snowball becomes an avalanche. And even Rishi Sunak will be unable to sort of hold back that avalanche. You can catch a snowball, but you can't catch an avalanche. Try as he might. And that does now feel the way this seems to be going. And what I think now should happen is, maybe rather than not only this, I think he should have organized like a big petition and really sort of rally the country around this, you know, get this, to the level where it ends up being debated, you know, in the House of Commons, where the government has to sort of respond to it. And of course, there ends up being a debate around this. So that is what I would have liked to see, of maybe like this being connected. Maybe that ends up being like the next step of where we end up going. And we'll see what happens. But ultimately, this is performative. It will put more pressure on Rishi Sunak. It is ultimately, I think, going to lose unless, Conservative MPs just go, well, tell you what, screw it, why not? It will also be very, very embarrassing if a significant number of Conservative MPs do vote for it, even if they do manage to see off this vote. But hey, we'll find out tomorrow. Who knows? Maybe Ed Davey's right. Maybe Ed Davey knows something we don't know. Maybe he has been in conversation with these, disgruntled Tory MPs who have said, you know what, we'll back this motion. I couldn't exactly say how many it would take to do it at the moment, but I think you would at least need 60 or more to be able to vote with you in this fashion. I would probably say maybe even in the 70s. Um, but again, we'll see what happens if they do decide to go this. Ultimately, things could get very interesting very quickly. So I doubt this is going to get to pass, to be honest. But if enough Conservative MPs do side with them, very embarrassing for Rishi Sunak, will certainly have further consequences. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.